This ain't just a Toy Story or a foreign unboxing. These are the stories of action, toy glory, and work clocking. SH Figuarts, Black Series are hot toys. And figures with transformation sequences that make noise. Check out the joints and the many points of articulation. We're celebrating the global collector nation. Sit back, relax, and get ready to rock this. Here's the real Chow.
I do a show now called Subconscious where I talk about my love of toys, and I wanted to just speak with you since, you know, I've told you this so many times in the past, but like your run on the G.I. Joe comics, but also in the G.I. Joe file cards was so foundational for me. And now with Snake Eyes coming out, I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to kind of just talk about, like, one, you know, kind of reflecting back on what it's been almost, 45 years since the first time?
It's been that long. It's 81 I started.
81, 82, 81, so 40 years. 40 years.
Mm-hmm. I did the work in 81, didn't come out till 82.
Right.
No.
I wanted to flash back to that period in 81 when I know that you've told the story many times where, like, essentially every editor at Marvel passed on the job.
Every writer, you know. Yeah. I mean, and then they asked all the writers first, then they asked all the editors and assistant editors. Nobody wanted to do it.
Why do you think that was? Do you think people were just like, G.I. Joe, isn't that like my dad's toys? Why would I want to write about them? Or what was it about? I didn't even want to do a toy.
It was all about the Benjamins.
Yeah.
Toy license books. The licensing fee to the owner of the copyright came off the top of the page rate.
Oh.
So it was the lowest rate at any of the companies. So, you know, no A-list artist or writer would deign to work on a licensed book. You know, that's why most of the licensed books are really crappy. They were like, because you got the C-list people or the hacks who just like knocking it out.
So why did you decide to take it if everyone else passed on it?
Because there was a huge prejudice against artists being writing, and I'd gone to every single editor at Marvel, and not a one would give me a writing gig.
Because you had wanted to do a similar like type story like before G.I. Joe even came out, right? Weren't you working on?
Yeah, but that was I proposed it as an editorial project. You know, I wasn't pitching it for me to write.
Right.
I would have wanted to write it, but I knew I couldn't. I mean, it was so bad that I got special dispensation from Jim Shooter to write for other comic book companies while I was an editor at Marvel. Right. So my first semi-regular writing gig was at Warren while I was an editor at Marvel, writing the Young Master Samurai strip with the Val Mayer drew in Eerie magazine for Louise Jones at the time, but like Louise Simonson now. And, you know, so when this, you know, the G.I. Joe's, you know, the thing came around, I jumped on it because, you know, there was no other way to me get writing work.
Right. And so was the deal always like you're not only writing the tie-in, but you also get to have say in who these characters are, because, you know, you famously wrote the file cards that provided the background for who these characters were, right? So, like, was that always part of the deal? And if so, like, to me, I would feel like, I know who has the foresight in 1981, but, like, this is your opportunity to kind of, like, build a universe from scratch, right?
Well, no. The thing was, I wrote what I call them dossiers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The main reason I started doing them was because I knew, you know, there were 10 characters to start, or just Joes, and then there were like 5 Cobras, and they said, well, if it goes to another year, we're going to have like, you know, 10 more. And I thought, 25 characters. You know, that's more than the Avengers, and everybody's bitching about, you know, trying to keep track of, you know, those characters. So I thought I better really write down, you know, who's who and what they do, and, you know, as a guideline for myself, you know. So I wrote them like like they were military 201 files.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what was the appeal of them, actually, right? Like, I remember as a kid just seeing the file card. It did read like you were flipping through someone's, like, CIA file, right? And
well, you know, in the originals, I even had, like, psychiatric profiles.
Right.
I also had peer assessment profiles written by other Joes in their on the voices.
Yeah.
So that really helped me define who these characters were, because once you start like digging into like what, you know, Steeler thinks about Scarlet,
right? And then, yeah, I mean, I've said before
that really solidifies the characters. But
that was always the appeal of someone like Snake Eyes, right? Because like when you went through his dossier and everything's like classified, you were just like, "Holy shit, how awesome is this guy?" And there's nothing about him.
It was really from my own personal reference. And then I think it was Kirk Bazigian, who was one of the heads of the Boys Toys, where I think he had the G.I. Joe thing going at the time. And he came to the office and he saw these on my desk. And he said, "Holy shit, you know, we should put these on the package."
Wow.
And that was the first time it was ever done.
Yeah.
And since then it's become, an industry standard. You can't have an action figure without a file card on the back.
Right. No, that was actually my question. It was like, whose idea was it? And I guess that's the answer, right? The Hasbro walked in and saw it, and it wasn't like they envisioned their card back to be a file of the character until they saw it on your desk. That's awesome. That's amazing, actually, because again, that it's like, to your point, it's tropey now, right? That you have to have like all of the personal details of your character on the back of the toy, but again, it was something about the authenticity of it too, right? Like it felt like you were reading someone's personal file, and doing so, you know, gave a sense of like credibility to like, these aren't just like colorful toys. These are like basically like real soldiers that you've captured in plastic somehow.
Well, it was also like a dual purpose, because after the first year, the Boys Toys people found out that the salesmen were using, they said this was the best sales tool they ever came across. All they had to do was go to like KB's or, you know.
For those of you listening, that was a toy store when we used to have toy stores.
KB's or, Toys R Us or whatever. And just he'd read the file cards. that would like clinch the sale. So the salespeople, went back to Hasbro and said, like, we, do more of these,
I mean, I'm surprised it has, and maybe it hasn't, I just missed it. I'm surprised there isn't like a coffee table book of literally all of the file cards in one book, because I think that, and I guess IDW has a publishing license. There's an idea for you guys. We need a coffee table book of all the file cards.
There is there's all these books being published. I think there is a book that's.
Oh, really? That's just the file cards? Oh, look at that. Is that can that be shown on camera? Is that top secret?
No, I don't even know if this is legal.
That's the beauty of the internet, I guess, right?
Yeah, but somebody just collected all of these.
Yeah. There are definitely like web archives of all of them. There's yojo.com that's like the most comprehensive archive of 3 3/4 G.I. Joe figures on the internet. It's so great that folks have time to do shit like this, though, right?
Well, but I'm lucky that people send me the stuff, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to keep track of it.
And I have to admit, like, I'm a big fan of the new line of classified figures, which are the 6-inch versions of the Real American Heroes, and they don't have the file card. There's like some newfangled kind of like QR code, I think, where you scan it and find the information online, but it doesn't feel the same as the old school dossiers, I have to admit.
Well,
so I want to ask you, like, before, you're so synonymous with G.I. Joe and action figures, but like before 1982, did you even consider yourself like a toy guy? Like, and toys back in the 70s and 80s are a very different animal than they are now. But what was your impression of like the toys themselves at the time?
Well, I actually created Bucky O'Hare way before.
That's right.
I did G.I. Joe, and we conceptualized Bucky O'Hare in all the iterations at the same time. We just didn't think of it as a graphic novel. We thought these are this is the storyboards for the animated movie,
right?
The
multimedia before it was a phrase, right?
Right. And if you look, here. He has like 3mm holes in the bottom of his feet, and instead of holsters, they have these 3mm plugs on the belts, and all the weapons have 3mm holes in them.
So you can peg them into the belt?
Right. So this is the design of the comic character. There is no compromise between what was drawn, and what could be produced as a toy. That was deliberate. So, because, even as a kid, I remember thinking, I'd get a toy or something, and it was like, what?
That's not what it looked like in the advertisement.
That's not what it's supposed to look like. And I wanted there to be no difference.
Right. How old is that figure you just held up?
This is one of the original Hasbro figures. This is not a boss fight.
Wow. So that's got to be what, 19?
Well, this is the 80s.
I was
the thing is, I created it in the 70s, but it didn't. It took like over 10 years to get it off its feet.
I mean, it looks pretty good for a 40-year-old toy, I gotta say. You kept it in good shape, Larry. I'm sure you could get a.
No, it's not. It's just. I don't play with it.
But truth be told, none of your fans play with their toys either, right? Like they do what I do. They just stick them on shelves. And,
I don't even put them in. I mean, I don't own a single comic book bag. And I still have comics I bought, over 70 years. Like 60 years ago.
Right.
I've got comics. I've got Uncle Scrooge comics that I bought when I was a kid.
And I'm sure you don't bag and board them, right? Like that's
they're like in tatters, but I still have them.
Since we're G.I. Joe has speaking of multimedia, it was a comic book, it was an animated series, of course action figures. Now it's been a series of live action films, and you've seen the first two, and you've had some close encounters with this new one, Snake Eyes, coming out later this year in July, starring Henry Golding and Andrew Koji. Can you talk about like the evolution of the live action versions? 'Cause to your point, anytime you adapt something from one medium to another, something gets lost in translation, and that can be said about the first two Joe movies. But what was your impression of this incarnation, especially going in, the controversially for some people, going into like the backstory of Snake Eyes himself? Well. And whatever you can and can't say, I understand. I'm sure there are NDAs in effect.
Well, first of all, it deviates from being the G.I. Joe movie, as as the same way that the later Wolverine movies deviated from being X-Men movies. Mm-hmm. I mean, they made all these X-Men movies, and after a while, people started figuring out, well, maybe people aren't all that interested in this guy with the beams coming out of his eyes.
And of course, you do have an affinity for Wolverine, the way
as they are in the guy with the adamantium claws. But they could all they had to do was go down the hall to the Marvel licensing room and realize that, oh, geez, we got 120 Wolverine licenses, mugs and plates and party masks and everything, not much of anything else from the other guys.
Yeah, not a lot of Cyclops toys floating around.
Well, yeah, but they're not a lot. Most of those other characters wouldn't sustain a standalone movie. Would you go to see a Cyclops standalone movie?
Truth be told, not really.
Or whatever. But with G.I. Joe, they were saying, oh, well, it's like, he's supposed to be this and this and blah, blah, blah in the history. And I'm saying, if you followed that original continuity, the character would be like, 73 years old. and these things have to evolve.
Right.
You just can't get stuck in that. If Batman, was the way that he was originally conceived, you wouldn't be able to get the Dark Knight Rises or the Joker or anything like that.
Right, and all comic book, indelible comic book characters and superheroes have to have that retcon in order to keep up with the times, right? Because to your point, Superman would be set in the 1930s if it was
right.
True
and all of G.I. Joe is retcon. I never had a long game plan.
Right. You famously make it up as you go along.
Yeah, I just literally make it up as I go along. Page by page, because what the core of it is that it is totally character centric. The file cards was the root of that.
Right.
I concentrate on nailing these characters and making the characters stand up and walk around, and they eat and they fart and
right. They're real people.
They become real a lot, because a lot of the character traits are based on people I actually know.
Right.
So I have a real life reference point, so that it's harder for me to veer off course.
Yeah.
If you write stories on a template that's based on story structure. It's like, in Hollywood they used to have script readers, and what script readers are.
They come in and they tell you, right.
No, they because each producer has stacks and stacks of unread scripts, and these girls, fresh out of college, who read all of them, and then they make smaller stacks.
Right.
And the parameters they're given, they have a sheet of parameters. They would does it have 3 acts?
Does it fit this formula? Right.
Yeah, can I follow the character arcs? Blah, 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 blah. But nowhere on those sheets does it say, do I like any of these people? 2, do I care what happens to these people? And 3, would I want to hang out with these people?
Right.
Okay. And that's where something like Harry Potter gets it right.
Yeah, right. Make the characters real people that readers or viewers want to be around.
Right.
And that's what gets them coming back.
And the fact is that if you ask somebody what the plot is of any given Harry Potter movie, they're like,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Oh, and then speaking of the humanity of the characters, I think the elephant in the room about the Snake Eyes movie is something you and I have talked about several times over the years that we've known each other, which is real quick, almost 20 years that you and I have known each other, which is crazy. I've always wanted an Asian American Snake Eyes, and the beauty of reimagining and adaptation is that you can get that without having to,
right.
The beauty of retcon is that no one's going back and destroying your old Hasbro figures or Marvel comics, right? They still exist. But this film can give me what I've always wanted ever since I was a 5-year-old child playing with my Snake Eyes toys.
Well, that's what, I remember 15 years ago, maybe, and I was a guest at San Diego, and I was doing a G.I. Joe panel or something with all these guys from Hasbro and every place else. And some Asian kid way in the back stands up. He says, "So how come the most badass ninja in the world is some white guy?" And I went, "Well, basically because that's what I had. I was in the first set. I was given 10 characters, and one of them was a commando. And I thought, oh, well, how, So Snake Eyes didn't become a ninja,
right,
until they introduced Storm Shadow,
right?
Who was the first Asian character. And I looked at the character and I said, he's the only Asian character in the G.I. Joe universe, and he's a bad guy.
Right.
So what can I do to alleviate this without, rocking the boat? I said, okay, well, over the course of the next year, I'm going to change him into a good guy, and not tell anybody else that I'm doing it.
Which I've said so many times on the Nerds of Color, how formative that arc was for me, because I think similarly, seeing Storm Shadow, and I think what folks forget who only know the cartoon or only know the movies and didn't read the comics is that Storm Shadow wasn't just Japanese; he was a Japanese American, right? He was Tommy, and
he's from San Jose.
Yeah, well, I thought it was Fresno, but it could be.
No, Fresno,
but who knows? But he was
the ninja dentist from the Nth Man is from Oxnard.
Yeah, there you go. But that gets lost in translation. Speaking of, right, when you have like him, he speak like this in the cartoon and whatever, right? But his arc from being like Snake Eyes' sworn enemy to learning who really killed the Blind Master to becoming a hero in his own right, and then an anti-hero and all that stuff is just all those layers and levels to an Asian American character. Like you can't underestimate what that means to people.
Here's the thing: is that to me, Storm Shadow should actually sound like my cousin Randy, who, was born and raised in Sacramento, California. Went to work for the PG&E as a lineman,
right?
Climbing telephone poles.
Yeah,
and who owned a pickup truck with a gun rack and a bass boat, right? He wore like Tony Lama boots and chewed tobacco and listened to country.
See, that's the Storm Shadow movie I'd want to watch.
That's where he comes from.
This is something, I don't know if you read my interview with Henry, like that's something we talked about, this notion that like Asian Americans can't also be American or like fish out of waters, because like that's the excuse always for like why Snake Eyes should be white or Iron Fist should be white or all the whatever.
See,
that's it's so reductionist.
Well, here's something that struck me from a long time ago. I was in the Army with a Chinese guy from Texas, was born and raised in Texas. Right? He was, looked totally Chinese. Spoke with this deep Texas drawl. His body language, everything about him, his cultural roots was Texas. Ergo, everybody called him Tex.
Nice.
And talk about some bizarre disconnect.
Right. No, of course.
That's how people related to him.
Yeah.
And the way you speak really determines, that's how humans are hardwired to judge who's in my tribe.
Exactly, right. And that's my whole project I have a whole other podcast where I interview other Asians from the South, because I'm from Virginia and a rural part of Virginia. It's that same cognitive dissonance where like, you have this thick country accent or whatever, but you have this face and people can't deal with that. And even just being Asian, even if you're not from the South, like if you're Asian American and you go to Japan, it's not like everyone's like welcoming you with like open arms. You know what I mean? So this notion that like
that's the other thing that people don't seem to understand is that your body language says a lot. You know,
Yeah.
you go to Japan or China, and people know, even if they look at your face, that you're not from there,
Right?
Because you don't have the body language.
And I almost feel like that gives so much more depth and nuance to that fish out of water story, which Henry and I talked about. That, you know, for someone who looks like Henry Golding, and to be fair, no one looks like Henry Golding. That is a very handsome man. It's almost a shame that he's going to have to be covered in a mask for the rest of his film career. But to go to Japan and be with the Arashikage clan, just because he's not white doesn't mean that the Arashikage clan's going to be like, you know, we welcome you with open arms. And that's the nuance that I think casting Henry brings to the Snake Eyes character that I've always imagined was there to begin with as a fan.
And I was really impressed with what I saw. They flew me out to this set in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And I did my cameo there, and got to meet Henry and got to meet the everybody else, including the fight coordinator.
Right.
It was amazing. You know, he's like one of the top fight coordinators in Japan.
And they taught them how to use katanas and.
Yeah, he did the Rurouni Kenshin series.
Oh wow.
Which is like amazing. And so that's the level of martial arts that people are going to see in this movie.
And Andrew Koji as Storm Shadow, I mean, I fan cast that guy like years ago to play Storm Shadow because, well, it's nice to have a Japanese actor finally play Storm Shadow. No shade to Mr. Byung-hun Lee from the first two G.I. Joe movies, but it's so nice to have a Japanese actor playing him. I kind of wish he was playing him more American, but that's a whole other, like to your point, I wish his accent was the accent he uses on Warrior, for what it's worth. But just Andrew as Storm Shadow and as Tommy, and Henry as Snake. I'm Larry. You can't know how happy I was when I saw that casting and that this movie is coming out. So it's a thing I've been pestering you about for 20 years, and it's finally come to fruition. So
yeah, I mean, I you know, when I first heard about it, I had misgivings.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting. What brought you around, though?
Well, just seeing it, you know, seeing what was being done, and reading the script and how they handled it. And all of that. You know, when they hired me as a consultant for the first one, they actually had written in the scene at the end where Snake Eyes talks.
Well, they did have a mouth on the mask for some reason.
You know, and you know, my first note to the production company was like, "Well, Snake Eyes can't speak."
You'd think they know that before they took the license.
They said, "Oh, yeah, this is the great part. You know, he can't talk, and at the end of the movie, he talks. Isn't that great?" I said, "But he can't talk." I said, "It's not like he took a vow of silence. He physically can't.
Like he's speak. Missing the vocal
cords." Yeah, right. And that's when I decided that if I was going to be the consultant to this movie, I didn't care about any of the other stuff from that point on. I said, you know, the other stuff is minor. I would just make it a point to every day say, Snake Eyes can't talk.
Well, but we've come full circle.
You have to prioritize. You have to, you know, have tri-age, you know.
Well, we've come full circle, though. 10 years later, we're getting not only a talking Snake Eyes, but full face to Snake Eyes. But, you know, and I think what people forget, this is, you know, even the Snake in the comics, he had a life before he was Snake Eyes, and I think that's what this movie is getting at. And I'm glad you brought up the Wolverine comparison, because I use that comparison too, because for decades, Wolverine had the background nobody knew about until they gave him a name and a history, and he hasn't suffered for it, right? He's still as popular as ever, and I think seeing what was behind the redacted dossier is terribly exciting for me. So congratulations, Larry. I'm very happy. I'm very happy for myself. I don't know why I'm congratulating you anyway. Well, Larry, I'm so thankful that we were able to work this out and talk about you know, working on this and you know, your history with Bucky O'Hare is fascinating. It's so cool to see the figure in your hand 30 years later. So I know you don't have a big internet presence, but is there anything that you want to plug that's coming up? I know there's some stuff you're working on. Is there anything that you want our listeners and viewers to be kept aware of in the coming months?
Well, I've been doing this 6-part Iron Fist Marvel, and then I've got some X-Men Legends stories. I'm doing a Patch story.
Oh wow, cool!
Wolverine and Madripoor. And
Larry Hama doing Wolverine. That's everyone can't get enough Larry Hama Wolverine stories, though.
Well, he's the old Wolverine. It's not, and I've got a bunch of projects I can't talk about.
Sure.
But I'm keeping busy.
You don't miss the convention circuit, do you?
No, not really. I mean, I like being at the conventions.
Right. Getting to and from.
Getting to and from, that's the hassle. and after COVID, boy, my doctor said, don't get on a plane.
Right, exactly. Well, thank God for Zoom, right?
2 weeks after my doctor told me don't get on a plane, he died from COVID.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Sort of like hammered home the point.
Yeah. So, literally, thank God for Zoom, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, as always, it's been a pleasure. I can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done and you continue to do and what your work has meant to me. I say this every time, and I'm sure you get tired of me gushing every time we talk, but it's been such a pleasure and for you to bless this podcast with your presence. So thanks so much, Larry.
Okay.